Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. And this week's episode, we're hitting some hard-hitting news. You may have seen this recently. Some bottles went missing. We now have a brand new whiskey from the Pacific Northwest. So sit back and buckle in to the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. We are joined by Shane Armstrong, master blender for Westland Distillery. Shane, thank you for spending a few minutes with Scott and I this dreary Monday evening here in Kentucky. It's like we're there in Seattle with you.
Yeah, you're getting in the right mode to taste that Gary on 10 or whatever's in your glass, I suppose.
We're transporting to another place.
It is Gary on a 10 because, we can't not talk about Gary on a 10 because that's the big thing. Not only did it make a big boom from a, release perspective, it also had a very interesting piece of news attached to it. We're not going to go there first because it's the tease, right? You got to get people to listen for a little bit. But first and foremost, we just want to say thank you and excited to have you. We've had Westland on 3 times over the course of the 6 years of the podcast, and third different person. Hopefully you stay around long enough for interview number 2. Everyone else has gone on to different things.
Yeah, but is there going to be some sort of curse with this? I don't know.
Hopefully not. But, excited to talk with you because there's a lot that goes into an American Single Malt, and you all been on the kind of cutting edge of this for quite a while. So, for you as being part of Westland's team, what's it mean to, see American Single Malt get ratified almost a year later, right? And then continue to be one of the flagship names in American Single Malt?
Yeah, it means quite a bit. I mean, the idea, the genesis of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission started here. So Steve Hawley runs that. He used to work for Westland and was part of the very beginning of Westland and all the label design and marketing and that. But it means quite a bit to be part of it because at a base level, Westland, we do quite a bit and there involves a lot of explanation. So if I don't have to explain what American Single Malt is, if we could get that in the lexicon, and it's a good place to start. And I think it's only the beginning. It took a long time to get it ratified, but we're still at the start of what people can do. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, Scott's a lawyer by trade. Did you think that took long, or is that a short period in legal terms? Scott, you know a little more than I do.
It's probably about average. It's right there in the middle. Nothing moves quickly with regulations and laws and trying to get the wording right, make sure everybody's happy, and rewriting it a million times.
Yeah, there was only
through. Never goes through on the first path.
No one accuses the government of moving blisteringly fast, but it's one of those things that there was a lot of teases, like, oh, it's coming up next session, we're gonna do it. And then I was kind of surprised when it actually did happen. I was like, oh yeah, okay, because it had been year after year of saying it was going to happen.
Do you find that now that it's happened, we're from Kentucky, so like explaining bourbon to people, like it seems like it just rolls off the tongue. But does it seem like things are trying to change or starting to change with the consumer?
Not a ton. I think that'll also take time to be established. American Single Malt is kind of a mouthful. Obviously, bourbon is a really nice name for something. The word feels good. American Single Malt, it kind of has to be because it's telling you exactly what it is. So we'll see. We'll see if people can grasp if there's a fundamental connection between all these different distilleries.
Mm. Yeah, I find that to be interesting too, right? Because bourbon, right, we know it's distinctive to only being made in America. But when I say the term single malt, if I don't put, the descriptor in front of that, it could be Irish or Scottish or Japanese or Taiwanese or Australian, whatever. Pick a country and throw a dart at a map. So putting American in there differentiates us so much in there because America's uniquely different, right, than everywhere else in the world. For that, have you seen adoption of American Single Malt from an international consumer, like being in a market that is very international? Do you see, people of all palates and all walks of life adopt this? Or are they still like, oh, that's not Scotch or that's not Irish single malt, right? Like, are they, I don't know, I'm not going to say pretentious, but I'm going to say pretentious when it comes to, their preferred single malt?
I mean, they always have to be convinced. It's like the easiest way is to get the whiskey in front of them and have them taste it, and then they can define it however they want. They can make their own decision about it. Yeah, I don't know largely what people's sentiment are, I guess.
Yeah.
So as you can see with my background, for people just listening, I have a bunch of 200 ml bottles behind me. This is where I spend most of my time, so I'm kind of about making the product a few years ahead, so I don't necessarily have my finger on the pulse of people's opinion.
Yeah.
Like here and there, they'll be like, "Oh, I've never tasted a good American single malt or that." And I don't really know what they've tasted or what that means, but all I can say is, here's Westland, give it a taste.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. So speaking of, right, like you're in the lab, there's all those samples there. With the way the rules were written for American Single Malt, that gives you, a wide variety, for you. So when you think about Westland's house style, right, like for your traditional batch, how is that different from the experimental things that you all get to do?
Yeah, so from a base level, fundamentally, we're trying to express the place that we are and sort of explore flavor. And so if you think about what is our kind of the backbone of Westland is our 5 malt grain bill, which uses malt that's kilned and roasted to different levels. So there we're developing flavor, and a majority of this barley is from Washington State, because Washington State grows a fair amount of barley. It doesn't grow all that much corn, so it makes sense here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we take that mash bill, the 5 malt, that gives it this really big malty flavor. And then during our fermentation, we use a Belgian Saison brewer's yeast. So if you've ever been to Seattle, we have a lot of breweries here. You
Yeah.
almost can't walk across the street without like striding to a brewery. We have
Yeah.
across the street here in Soda, there's a brewery, and then also behind us there's another brewery. Um, but so you think about the development of flavor, and you think about beer and the fermentation process. Belgian beers are driven by that yeast, so
Mm-hmm.
it can develop the flavor even more. Give it some red fruit notes, some spice notes during fermentation, and then we do a classic double pot still distillation that you'll see at a fair amount of single malt producers. And then as far as casks, we take that and we predominantly put into new oak casks. We have two different ones that have different char and toast levels and different air drying time of the staves. So some are air dried for 18 months, other are air dried for 24 months. So we've built up this big multi-spirit, developed the fruit character and fermentation so it can stand up to being put into a new oak cask. Otherwise, use a pale malt, maybe use a more standard yeast like an M strain distiller's yeast, and you put it into new oak, the cask is really, really going to dominate. So we sort of put these puzzle pieces together to get to the end, because in a lot of ways, because of bourbon, American whiskey is defined by a new oak character.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to combine these two things. You have a much more delicate spirit, single malt, but you can take steps to having to age in a new oak cask, and that's the backbone of Westland. But if you want to keep extending it out, it's like, okay, barley. There are thousands of different varieties of barley.
Mm.
There's a very small list of what are the AMBA approved malting varieties. And so we've worked with Skagit Valley Malting and the Washington State University Bread Lab,
Yeah.
and we've distilled, I don't know, depending on how you count it, like 30 to 50 different varieties of barley.
Wow.
So kind of wild. And within that, so some of them are distinct, like genetic lineages, and then you take that grown in different areas or malted slightly differently. So that's a big exploration of barley that we've done. You ever had our Calare release?
Yes.
That's like a direct single variety, single vintage, what that
Okay.
has been. And then you think about cask. I was talking about using a lot of new oak. Well, we also use a cask, which we'll get to in a minute. Quercus garryana is a
Mm-hmm.
species of oak. This is as opposed to Quercus alba, which grows on the eastern half of the U.S., on the eastern side of the Rockies. So Gary oak grows in a pretty thin band from BC, Canada, down through to California. And this is think about this. You're making whiskey and you want to express where you are. Like you have a unique species of oak that grows here. You're going to give it a try. And it really it's very unique compared to standard American white oak. It's probably more comparable to French oak, has a lot more spice, has less sort of vanilla and coconut than standard white oak.
Mm.
So that's a little bit of what we do. I could go on and on.
No, no, I love that because I think a lot of people hear like malt, and right, it's the back end enzyme producer, right? In bourbon, right? That's what they think of. They don't think of it as a flavoring grain, which malt has a lot of flavor to it. Um, and I've always thought of asking this question. I've never asked it, so I'm going to ask somebody who does play with this. Like when people say like chocolate malt or these different types, is that like a roasting technique or is that a certain varietal of malt that is created? Because you talked about all these different malt strains, and we talk a lot about heirloom corn recently. That's becoming really popular. So is there like heirloom styles of barley that's produced, or how is that all created?
Yeah, there are. So for the question on the chocolate malt, so that's just a roasting level. So
Mm,
you'll have like in brewing, it's the Lovibond scale, which is just how dark it is. And so
okay.
there's like chocolate and pale chocolate, and then brown malt, which has a little bit less than that. And then there's things that aren't roasting, but just playing with kilning temperatures.
Mm,
So like what defines like a Pilsen malt versus a pale malt versus a Munich, like these are happen in the kiln. So there's
okay.
that. But then the sort of what you're getting at, the heirloom style, is there are those in barley. One of them that I was just tasting the other day, it's called Bear Barley, Bere, which if people are familiar with Bruichladdich, which is our sister distillery, also owned by Remy Cointreau. It's a really ancient variety, like tracing back to like the 8th century or something. Like it's something that was grown up for a long time in Scotland. And so this is what's called, you could say heirloom, but they also call it landrace variety,
Mm.
which is meaning something that wasn't just bred either in a lab or intentionally, meaning there's will be a mix of genetics in a field, and then eventually like sort of one profile will start to dominate because usually that's fit to that region, if you could imagine.
Yeah.
So that's why they call it a land race, because then it's almost like the genetic source sorting and everything's getting worked out in the field from generation to generation, and it eventually becomes like a distinct uh, profile. But that's
Cool.
heirloom, and then other ones are, ones that are crosses of things in labs. Maris Otter uh, is a UK variety that's often used in crosses to make other varieties that maybe are more suited to being grown in different regions.
For sure. And like Macallan, I think uses that as like kind of their barley of choice, right? I think I got that right.
Yeah, these things have shifted from years to year because you think about large scale production, and the idea is in the field, you want it to be disease resistant and you want it to be high yielding when you mash it. And
Mm-hmm.
so the crux is that if you keep using, there was this famous one called Golden Promise,
Yeah.
which was for years was the dominant variety that people used. But eventually, like these diseases that attack it in the field are going to adapt to this variety. So then you end up changing it to something
Mm,
else, either because you want it to be high yielding or because the disease is sort of knocking it out in the field.
Mm.
So they end up shifting pretty much as a group.
interesting. And then like the most common, right, is like 2-row or I think
Yeah, so
6-row
two-row
barley,
spring
right?
varieties. Yeah, two-row is probably the most common. That one that I just mentioned, Bear, is a 6-row.
Mm,
So we've done a couple of 6-rows, Alba being one of them, Bear being one of them. They have a higher protein content, so more of these enzymes. You actually see them being used by adjunct brewers, like really big, so like Bud or something like that, that wants a really, high enzyme, big enzyme package to be able to, whatever, make use of their adjuncts, whether it be corn or anything else. But it has a high protein content. And since we use an all malt mash bill, we're not really, we don't need all the enzymes, but it does gum up the mash a little bit. It's harder to work with, but it does have a pretty distinct flavor difference from the 2-row. So you can have 2-row spring. You can have ones which are called winter varieties, which they plant just before winter and go into dormancy during winter, which is kind of interesting.
mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like I just got a whole education on barley
Yeah, quick.
because
I mean, I don't know the most, but I know what we do.
yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think, it's always good, right? We try to educate people on American Single Malt all the time. One, because it's an emerging spirit, but we also enjoy drinking it. And so I think it's fun when you get the nuance of it because it's not just a throwaway grain. It's an important grain that it can impact a lot of flavor. And like you said, it's delicate, so it can go a lot of different ways depending on how you want to influence with, the types of barley you're using or the types of barrels you're using.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. The future is sort of wide open. It has a lot of possibilities in terms of like where people are in different regions, the barley that they can use, and uh, and the choices that they make in production, whether it's cask, whether it's yeast. There's a lot of different tweaks that you can do to make American single malt.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And so now we get to the the teas from earlier, right? Right. So you mentioned and teased Gary Oak. So this year's a big year. One, because you've been putting out the different editions of Westland Garyana for 10 years now. And so with that came a big new release in a nice package for people watching at home. A nice bottle. You can see this is almost empty because we, again, sampled it to our Patreon members. If you're interested in joining our Patreon, go to patreon.com/Bourbon Lens. We'd love to have you as part of our tasting club. But this bottle also has a unique story along with it because some of them vanished in the night, for lack of better terms. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on that. If you want to read more, it's all over the news. But what was it like creating such a special edition for a brand that, you know, along with the other Pacific Northwest brands, kind of launched American Single Malt to the US?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's big for Westland. It's big for me personally. I mean, I started working for Westland in 2012 and started doing more of the full-time blending in 2016. So my very first project as a blender, sort of in isolation. There's our founder, Matt Hoffman, had made some prototypes of the very first Garyana for 2016. He sent that off, and then there were some mistakes that happened in the rack house with what cask got dumped. And he had to move on to other things at the time. And so he's like, okay, I want you to uh, to make the first edition of Garyana based on something similar to some prototypes that he made. So fast forward to now, I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years. So we don't say that age is the end all be all with quality, but it definitely means something, especially for us to put that 10-year age statement on it. It's not to legitimize, but 10-year-old means something in whiskey. There's a lot of
Mm,
bottles out there with that 10-year-old age statement. People say, oh, like kind of were discussing a little bit earlier with American Single Malt and how the world feels about it. But you see an American Single Malt with that 10-year age statement on it. I mean, it tells you two things. It tells you that they had the stock to be able to do that, the foresight to do that, and that they've also been around and we've stuck around for this long. So it means a lot.
yeah.
And for it to be Garyana is just the cherry on top for us because that's something that really expresses where we are. This Gary Oak is extremely unique, much more limited supply. Um, and it can define the vatting from year to year. My job is taking this something that's very unique and is very variable from cask to cask and putting it in a different framework. And so to put it in this 10-year framework was really interesting to me to be able to spread out the notes a little bit more and work with that maturity.
I was going to say, for any distillery to hit 10 years is a huge milestone, but to hit 10 years of a special release, which is essentially an experimental release, it's like you've been experimenting for 10 years. So it's like you've had enough foresight to put away enough barrels, but then also you've been crafting, this profile that you're looking for, and then to continue to release, the Garyana limited release series. It's pretty impressive. So congrats to that.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was one of those things where I approach Garyana every year like it's a new thing. 'Cause like I said, the casts are pretty variable. They're not all from like the exact same area. They're not all air dried for the same amount of time. A little bit different treatment from different cooperages. So I kind of go into each vatting as if I don't know anything, and I'm just there to learn about what that stock is doing. So you go year to year, and then the obvious thing when you're making 8 and 9 is you say, hold on a second. Some of the spirit is getting teetering towards that 10-year mark. Like, is there enough stock? And then start to think about making prototypes of it.
Mm.
And yeah, fortunately enough, it worked out.
Yeah, and this is experimental in a lot of different ways because I think it has, I don't know if it's true, but it feels like there's like 10 different casks that are used in this 10-year anniversary. How does it go into, creating the profile? Like, can you walk us a little bit behind the scenes of what you were trying to do when you set out? Obviously, you said you go in with like a fresh mindset, but was there any type of picture you wanted to try to paint?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this earlier, but this idea of taking something that's inherently pretty concentrated notes. A lot of times I call it clove, but it can be a more ambiguous spice than that. This is something I always say. I don't know if people are getting tired of it yet, but I always reference Dune when I talk about it. And I've been doing this before the movies came out, by the way. Was that it's the spice, it's the spice, something that holds so much power, but you don't really know what it is. Sometimes you can't quite put your finger on it. So it's to take something like that, which in past versions, and it doesn't bring much sweetness to the table. So there's a balancing act to do. So you take that big profile in the past three or so versions, so 7, 8, and 9. So it was playing against wine casks, was playing against PX, was playing against Oloroso. So fairly big characters playing against the Gary Oak. But this one, I wanted to add a fair bit of space. You can imagine it's like a compressed cask, really concentrated spice notes. But as you stretch that out and you vat it with things like these rum casks, some refill casks, you can allow those notes to start to spread out a little bit. So you can almost lengthen the experience time of it. And also maturity plays a role with something like that, using a fair amount of used oak. So that was kind of the intent. And it's something I played with it at different points in time, but it really wraps it all together in the 10-year.
Yeah, like a spiced chocolate is kind of where I get that. There is some red fruit, I think, that goes along with this as well. But like a spiced chocolate, like an Indian chocolate. And I only got to try that because Bardstown Bourbon Company did some with Amaret and they had like a spiced Indian style chocolate with it. And that's kind of what it gives me with like some red fruit. But it does give you that space. It does have a lot of spice. It's an ambiguous spice, like it feels Thanksgiving-ish, sage, clove, a little bit of nutmeg, right? But I think it's, perfect season to be released in, right? Could ask for a
Yeah, for
better,
sure.
flavor profile for what we're about to eat here in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. So the sort of red fruit, a lot of times we call it cherry in different conditions here. Something that's it's kind of a commonality because we always use the Belgian brewery uses yeast or saison style yeast, and that a lot of times drives that red fruit note. So
Mm,
it's an interesting through line if anyone's out there and wants to, because some of ours are feel wildly different, but I think that's a through line of everything. If you're curious of connecting the dots on it.
Yeah, I'm comparing the Westland. I think it's the flagship, whatever, the Westland American Single Malt, comparing them side by side, and it, like the strawberry red fruit note, it just jumps out of the glass on the Gariana.
Yeah, what's interesting about Gary Oak too is, I mean, this happens with a lot of whiskeys, but especially with Garyana, is letting it sit for a minute in the glass, and then that spice note develops even more.
mhm.
So I always recommend doing that.
Yeah, I just like for this, like that like chocolate maltiness is just really front to back, side to side, is something that I've come to appreciate. I don't know if there's stout cask in this. It kind of has got like a stouty type of feel to it, but I really enjoy, the mouth feel to the lingering flavors. I don't have to sip this very fast. I can sip it and it just kind of breathes with me for quite a while, which I appreciate in the whiskey. Like I want it to be nuanced. I want to be able to sit back, think about it. What am I getting? What am I experiencing? And this is that. And for the cigar lovers out there, if you like a cigar, I think this would, really kind of play nicely at 100 proof, would stand up to a cigar very well.
Yeah, so like I've been, talking about that 5 malt mash bill. So in this batting, 42% was that 5 malt mash bill. So like that
Mm,
has, those very developed chocolate notes that you get from the malt, but are also you'll get from some casks as well. So those combine in an interesting way. And the remaining is pale malt of some of different varieties. So it's like this batting is We were talking about this a minute ago, but it looks confusing on paper. It's better to just taste it and then maybe look at the paper after to see what's actually in it. Because in terms of the pale malt, we have our Washington Pale, we have Copeland, which is a variety of malt. We have some of a distiller's malt and some Pilsen malt, and that's just ones that are in sort of like what you call the pale category.
No, I mean it's an enjoyable pour. I mean, I like American Single Malt, but this is definitely unique and enjoyable. Scott, any other thoughts that you have kind of on the flavor profiles or what's standing out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like an elevated version of Westland. I've always liked Westland. I mean, it was probably one of the first 2 or 3 single malts, American single malts. Probably single malt, period, because I wasn't drinking a lot of scotch with having a bourbon podcast. But this is just like an elevated version. I mean, it's worthy of a limited release. Like that's the whole purpose of it. But it's very good, and I've tried, I believe, a couple of the past few years releases of the Garyana, and this is just like a fruit bomb, and I love it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, good to
Yeah.
hear.
I would always say it wrong. Like, did you say it is Calare? Is that correct?
Yeah, Calere.
Calare.
Yeah, so it's interesting. That's gonna our like variety ones are we'll eventually have a different name for it. The Calere is kind of ending somewhat soon, so if people
Mm.
like it and see it out there, you can pick it up, and then it'll become a different product. But it's Latin for to cultivate.
So I really enjoyed that. But this one, like this might be my favorite Westland release that I've had. I've enjoyed the Claries because they were like campfire whiskeys to me, and I would literally sit around the campfire and drink the whiskey because we'd get a couple ounce sample and they would just disappear one night, one pour. But this is a sipping whiskey, which you can sit, enjoy, and sip, and that's what I really appreciated. So not to be Debbie Downer and say, hey, great job, 10-year. What's year 11 look like? But, you talked about, you're already playing around. Like, do you have older stock that you can play with? Like, what does that look like as you continue to evolve Westland's portfolio of American Single Malt? Like, is Gary Oak, something that's a long-term play for you all?
For sure, it's definitely long term. I feel like it's pretty definitive to what we do. And so before we did this 10-year, and we're gonna have 10-year age statements for a bit now. It's not the 11 is not going to be 11 years old. I'll say
Yeah.
that. We're not going to set that precedent. But so when I started designing this, part of it is looking forward and looking at the stock and seeing that we have enough. It wasn't just going to be a one-off thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm actively thinking about it. The way I approach it is, we have this cutoff. Well, you have like 2 defining things for this now. It's going to be 10 years old and it's going to have a certain percentage of Gary Oak. But beyond that, the door's wide open, and we have a fair amount of casts and different things fit together. So usually the way I approach it would be see what's available, and then within those, I'll make some sub blends of whether it's certain spirit cask combinations or certain finish combinations, and I'll make mini vattings of those, and then start to combine them at different ratios and see what works
Mm,
in a prototype scale.
for sure.
And then aside from limited releases, you guys still do local releases of like the single cask, right?
Yeah, we do. We do a fair amount of distillery only. So our larger releases are our flagship, like you mentioned earlier. We have our beer cast finish and our wine cast finish.
Yeah.
Like I said about expressing where we are, so all the beer casts are local breweries that we've loaned casts out to, and they've given them back, and we finish whiskeys into it. Majority of the wine casts are local wineries in Washington. So those are larger scale releases. We've made a blended whiskey it's not quite wide.
I did. Yeah, I found that online and I was like, okay, I'm going to message Wagstaff and see what the hell's going on with this. And she's like, well, can you talk to me after the new year when we have a little bit more and it's a little bit wider? I'm like, our reach isn't that big where we're going to blow your doors off. But, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's got an 8-year age statement on it. So it's a blended whiskey, so 28% of it is made at Westland. Some of that 5 malt in New Oak, some aged in PX sherry butts. But yeah, there's an interesting project because we've been so dedicated to making single malt for a long time. So as a blender, it was really interesting to make a blended whiskey. That's a huge part of the market. Make something that could, it's a lower price point, so to be accessible to people, and if they want to get into Westland deeper, they can. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about a campfire whiskey. That is a watch post in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So that was fun to work
Interesting.
on.
I had to bust out one of my older bottles of Westland. This is actually a Frankenstein bottle.
I don't remember making a Frankenstein release.
One of the original Sherrywood with the plastic screw cap.
Yeah, the
But
screw top.
But if
I
you look
like
at the
that.
side, I was trying to do some bottle consolidation.
That's a custom batting. You put some peated in there. That'd be interesting.
So obviously there's a lot more peated in here because I didn't. Back when I created this, like 2 or 3 years ago, I think now, I didn't love the peated, but to be expected for a bourbon drinker. So
Right.
yeah, it's about nearly 50% of it was peated. About 30% was sherry, and then 21% was the flagship, or the American, I think is what it was called at the
American
time.
oak at the time. Yeah, it's interesting. So our current flagship is a bit of a combination of those three, because we had American oak, Sherrywood, and peated. Now we just have flagship. The only difference is, so like flagship has a little bit of peated malt, less than the actual peated. It's only about 10%, so it doesn't define the vatting at all. It just sort of
Yeah.
extends the finish and adds some complexity to it. Has some Oloroso sherry casks. That Sherrywood had PX as well as Oloroso, so that's a little bit of a difference. But we just wanted to have one singular expression, because people were getting a little bit confused with the three. So it's like, okay.
And that's why I blended them, right?
Yeah, exactly. You were ahead of the game for sure.
Yeah. You beat Shane to the punch on that one.
Me, it's still like distinctly Westland. Like, and I'll pour a little bit on occasion when I'm just like, I need to remember what the different, because we talk about American single malts all the time, and we rattle off like the big five or whatever. I'm like, try that blend or that special, whatever concoction I made, but it's very good.
Yeah, but to answer your question about single cask release, yeah, you'll see a lot of single casks out there. Some older ones are on this. People are watching the video. The top shelf are some older ones, but we always have a hand fill at the distillery, so people can come in and fill their own bottle. Right now is a 5 malt finish in a white port cask. That's interesting. We do what we call our cask exchange release. So that'll be casks that we loaned out to a brewery, like a cider maker, or even like an Amaro. We've worked with someone who makes an Amaro in Vancouver. So we'll loan casks and then finish whiskey in it, and those will be smaller releases, usually just for the distillery.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite the lineup. If you're in Seattle and you come to the Soda neighborhood, come to the distillery, there's a lot of whiskeys to taste.
Well, it sounds like we need to make a trip to Seattle in the
exactly.
near future. But Shane, first of all, congratulations on a great release. And we really appreciate being able to try it and share it with a variety of different people, and hopefully make them fans of Westland along the way.
Appreciate it.
Continued success, and we really appreciate you joining this episode of the Bourbon Lens.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep.
Yeah,
all right.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody, cheers.
Cheers.